let's dig in and let's figure
Sure,
this
why
out.
not? Because yeah, I got stuff.
We got
I
stuff.
got
I
stuff.
do I do have an outline to kind of keep us on topic, so that's going to be good.
Oh, good.
But yeah. Well, welcome to Pros Talking Pros today with the illustrious Troy Lambert and the mediocre Stacey. And we are going to be talking about, I love this intro, it's so good. We sit
Every
and
time you say that, oh my God.
we jabber and we rant and we go off about anything related to writing and this publishing gig and this business we all love and hate at the same time. So we're going to talk a little bit about today the woo woo, because this is the Troy term, the woo woo of being an author, or the woo woo of writing. And so the first thing that I feel like we need to define is what we mean by the woo woo. And I'll elaborate based, but what you define as woo woo, Mr. Author, take it away. What is that? What is that woo woo?
So the woo-woo side of writing is kind of this mysterious thing that people ask you, where do you get your ideas? Like,
Okay.
and where does writing come from? Like, where does that story come
Story come
from?
from.
Like, once you have the idea, eh, or even is the idea your original idea, or are the ideas coming from somewhere outside of you, and you are just a channel for those ideas and those stories? And where do those stories and those words come from? And every writer knows that when you get in this kind of people will call it the flow state in creativity. They'll call it all kinds of different things. But when
Mm-hmm.
you're in almost this writing trance, it doesn't feel like you're the one writing all the time. It feels like a story is just flowing through you are the vehicle to get it onto paper. So, people ask, where does that story come from? Where do those ideas come from? Where do the words come from? And the answer is kind of a woo-woo-ish. We call it kind of woo-woo because it's out there in the very spirituality of being a writer. When,
Mm-hmm.
there's a number of us that are not necessarily religious people, but you talk to us about spirituality, and yeah, hey, we're on it because we understand fully what it means to channel something and to be a part of something that feels much larger than ourselves without really a great explanation for that
Yeah.
you know
So
and
we're not
so,
gonna
yeah.
we're gonna kind of just destigmatize then this idea of the supernatural, of like the muse that comes in and like helps the writer become a better writer or channel these ideas or these characters or these experiences into your story. And yeah, there is, like you said, something ethereal about that, right? There's something that kind of like
Hmm.
outside of your consciousness that can kind of play into that. So this isn't about doctrine or dogma. We're not going to get religious on you here.
Oh
But
no.
we're gonna talk about the mysterious creative process in this episode. So we're gonna kind of go through kind of just the mystery of the muse and why this has been talked about for thousands of years, right? Thousands of years they've talked
Hmm.
about these ideas and how they just kind of come to us, this inspiration that comes to us as a creative. So there are different well, let's first talk about where these, like creativity in general, where it comes from. I want to believe that sometimes we're a collective conduit for all the many experiences that you consciously and subconsciously um, absorb throughout your life, but also this can come in through others. There is some science behind this that I will kind of talk about. One of the things that I've been told about my experience as being a mother is that while I was pregnant with my children, if I was particularly stressed during that pregnancy, that would have been passed on, or there might be health risks that my children might have because of the way I felt during my pregnancy. And there is magic to that, without, for lack of a better term, because people really don't understand how this even works, because it's just imprinted in our DNA in some way. But so like you have to know that there's probably some ways that we absorb ideas, or we kind of take in our surroundings and our brain processes them. And this is why we have dreams, where we go to sleep and our dreams are it's basically our memory bank cataloging all the information that it collected throughout the day, and we're visually putting this all into a context. And sometimes it's some wild dream where you're being chased down a dark alley by a dragon, which I seem to have that dream frequently. But some of us are a little more vivid dreamers than others. And but anyway, so you know that your brain is going to take in this information some way. So there's different reasons why this might be happening. And of course, there's probably some science behind it as well. But there the theories behind this, the traditions behind telling these stories. I mean, we know the story of the muses through Greek mythology, and spirit guides that come to the Native Americans. There's the divine inspiration that religious people believe in, collective unconscious. There's all kinds of these things. So what do you think is neuroscience versus mysticism? Is it brain or is it science?
Well,
is it
it's
is
really
it
hard to say because
supernatural or
there's also a certain element that creative people tend to beget creative people, right?
yeah.
If your parents were creative, you or grandparents or whatever, there seems to be some sort of lineage, right? So is there a creative gene? Like,
Mhm.
can we sequence your DNA and go, oh, novelist? That's too bad. But you know, do it before you're born. Your parents can save lots of trouble. But anyway, but I mean,
Just
but no, I
throw
mean,
that one out.
is there a creative gene like that? Well, there's not really a science that says yes, absolutely, there's a creative gene, but there's a certain amount of anecdotal evidence, and then that comes down to is that nurture versus nature?
Right.
But then, and so you get into that whole debate. But I can tell you that, like, I'm a lot more like my father, who I did not grow up with, than I am like my mother, who I spent my entire childhood with, for
Right.
example. Right? So there's certain arguments for that creativity being something that's inborn into you. You're a natural born storyteller. My grandfather was a fantastic storyteller. So he
Hmm.
was not a writer, but he was a fantastic storyteller, which essentially is the same thing. He could have made different choices in his life and ended up being a writer.
Right.
There's a certain amount of that. So I would believe that there's some science behind it. I don't know that we have enough studies behind it to say this is precisely what this is, because I just don't think it's something that's because I mean, we tend to study a lot of things that are genetic that are bad so we can
Hmm.
find a cure. I don't know there's necessarily a cure for
I don't.
creativity. I really hope not,
I
you
hope
know.
not.
Um,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean? So there's that part of it, but there's also a certain amount of spirituality where it does feel like these stories come from somewhere else. Like there are times when, like, I always tell the story of there was a time when a reviewer quoted part of my book in the review. And I read the review and thought, that's a really cool quote. I wonder where she got that. And it was a quote from my book. I didn't remember writing that. I didn't remember editing that. I didn't remember anything about it. But it was there, right? And it
Hmm.
was kind of a cool quote. But you know what I mean? Like I don't so how does that happen? That we write things that are just so cool and awesome and we don't remember putting that into that story or exploring that in that way. And a part of that has to be that your creative mind is working subconsciously as well. Well, is that subconscious, is that being influenced by things you have consciously absorbed throughout your
Hmm.
lifetime? Or is that being influenced by something external? And I think the answer is we don't
Maybe it's both.
know.
Yeah, it could be both.
Maybe it's
Um,
both.
yeah, just as an
So,
experience that I've had, even on the editing side, like I've seen and had conversations with authors where I've brought up parts of their story and I've said, "Oh yeah, I love how you have this mirrored character here and how it brings this theme to life and it makes this really kind of it fleshes out this idea and helps your readers kind of like see this flaw really really well in this character." And my authors, they always shake their head like, "Oh wow, yeah, I didn't even know I did that," and more
mhm,
often than not with the newbie authors who don't even realize that that's what they're doing, who don't do it intentionally. I know that Stephen King has talked about how he channels his work.
mhm.
Elizabeth Gilbert, I think she even said once that she has kind of a whole way about doing that. So So maybe there's a way that you can make this easier. Is there a way that you can maybe set up sacred
Hmm.
rituals? And so how about you, Troy? Do you have any
Yes.
kind of like
Oh,
sacred rituals to kind
for
of bring
sure.
out the muse?
So here, the reality of the writing life is that, like, if you're going to do this commercially, you're going to do it for a living, you need your muse to show up on a regular basis.
Right.
You can't just wait for inspiration to strike. It really does not work that way. And also, what I have found is writers that wait for inspiration to strike, first of all, inspiration doesn't strike that often, and those writers tend to be very unhappy. They tend to have other problems throughout their life, right?
Hmm.
And I would believe, because of my own experiences, that those problems are related to the fact that your muse does not show up often enough, right? That like you have issues with getting your muse to show up. So I wouldn't call them rituals, but I have routines that are deliberately designed to make my muse realize I'm sitting down to write fiction and go, okay, I'll grab a cup of coffee and be right there. Right?
Okay.
That's kind of the thing that you're hoping for. And does that work every single day, every single time that you sit down?
Probably
No,
not.
but there are times when you just sit down and you start writing anyway. And then there are times when you feel like your muse did not really show up that day, but you wrote anyway, or that you just start writing and then your muse says, "Oh, pardon me, let me catch up." And they
Yeah.
come, your muse comes and
Comes
shows up
barreling in.
partway through the writing thing. So those first few paragraphs you wrote might be garbage, but the last part can be a gem. And the truth is, you don't always know when your muse is going to show up. It's not always predictable. But the one thing you can be assured of is that if you're not sitting in that position, making yourself ready to write, your muse will not show up.
Right.
It doesn't have anything
Right.
to show up for. So there's a certain amount of like the value of developing rituals and schedules and times to help your muse show up. And to not get discouraged the time when it just doesn't work quite as well as you would like. Because no one should be afraid of bad writing, because
Right.
bad writing is where everything starts,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So don't be afraid of bad writing. Just realize bad writing is part of the process and allow
Right.
it to happen.
And allow
And
it to
when you
happen.
do, that's when the good writing and the inspiration comes out. So you can definitely work at being more inspired.
Right.
And I think that you should, because if you're just waiting for the perfect time and inspiration, if I had waited for that, I would have never finished my first novel. It
Yeah.
would not have happened because it wouldn't even have been possible with the life that I had at that time unless I deliberately made space for creativity. So I think that that's definitely a part of it. And those rituals can be anything you want them to be that inspire you, but you start by trying something. And one of them is having a place and a time to write and sitting down. And even if words don't come or words come slowly, you stay at that place and that time for as long as you promise yourself that you will and write and
Right.
just do it.
Yeah.
You
Make it
know,
intentional.
most of
Make it
you, yeah,
purposeful.
yeah, because most people don't have the luxury because you're not, a lot of people are not full-time writers. So you don't have the luxury of sitting around all day and smelling incense and waiting until that perfect idea for the next sentence comes along so you can write that next paragraph. You don't have that luxury. you
Right.
know if you want, you have to write when you have the opportunity. And if you're like I was and still am, that writing is a burning itch that you have to scratch. And if you don't, you turn into a person, a creative who is not creating is a dangerous person. So don't do that. You will do other
Right.
creative things and they will not be good for you. So or you will
So,
do things to quiet your creativity. That won't be
yeah,
good for you.
that won't be good for you either. So intentional, be intentional. I guess Troy, this is what you're saying. Be intentional. Set a time, set a schedule if that's possible, or at least set a place and a time. I really liked I just got done meeting with a great author. I cannot wait till this book comes out. It was really great. But she and I were doing a post manuscript review consultation, and we were sitting there and um in a really great bar. Like, by the way, that was a really neat place. Have you ever, it's oh, I'm gonna do a plug for this little bar. It's so cool. It's called the Six Stag. Have you ever drank and have you ever been there? It was so good. It's
Where's
a
it at?
base. It's there in Nampa. Here in Nampa, it's a basement bar, and
Oh,
it's really cool. And you go in there, and they like these little cutouts that look like you're like sitting inside of a cave. And we're
oh,
just huddled. Like it was so intimate and so awesome. And we just sat in that booth for, 2 hours chatting up about her book. It
oh,
was really cool, dark, very intimate, fun place.
very
But anyway,
nice.
okay. Anyway, I'll have Sydney edit that out. Sydney, you're gonna have to edit that out. I'm gonna do this, and then she'll know that that's where it's supposed to happen. Um. Anyway,
Yeah.
so it was a really cool place, and we sat there and talked about it. But one of the things we talked about is like sometimes she would just get up at like 3 in the morning and just write, and just she says
Hmm.
I would just write, and it was like it would just come to me, or she would get a really cool idea, and then she'd just get up and but she was making the time to do that. Like she was giving her muse the space to to have that freedom, like to come in and inspire and then
Hmm.
like take advantage of it. So if that's what it is that you have to do, then do that. But give yourself a chance to manifest what you're doing. Give yourself the affirmations to say what I'm doing is worthwhile, because I know a lot of authors will say, well, I'm just no good, or I just can't do this, I'm not any good at this. And you do that and you're not giving your muse the chance to kind of like nurture itself and become like that creative force that it can be. So give yourself a routine, and that routine can be as regimented as like I will get up at 6 a.m. every morning and I will write until 7:30. It can be that routine, or it can be as weird as like I'm going to light a candle and I'm going to sit in my room for an hour and I'm going to just see what happens.
Hmm.
I'll do that once a week, and you can just do that. But it just whatever you want to do to kind of give yourself that space to be creative. So
Hmm.
you know,
Um, and to add to that, like you were saying, she wakes up at 2 o'clock in the morning with an idea and you write it down.
mhm.
Give yourself the tools and the freedom to write anywhere. You
Oh
can
yeah.
write on your phone, have an e-ink tablet, have
Hmm.
something that if you get an idea at work and you can take a 15-minute coffee break, and write that down. Your
Hmm.
buddies take a 10-minute cigarette break, take a 15-minute writing break, and write that idea down and let your muse talk to you during that
Hmm.
period. The worst thing you can do to your muse is say, hey, be quiet, I don't got time for that. You know,
Yeah.
or
And
hey, I need to sleep. You wake up in the middle of the night with a brilliant idea, you need to have a way, a notebook by your bedside, whatever, to
mhm.
write that down, because that can be some of the most valuable. Now, sometimes that can be absolute garbage. You wake up in the morning, you're like, I don't even know what that meant. That was absolutely horrible. It doesn't matter, but give yourself room and opportunity to write those things down. Your muse is telling you something, and it can be
Yeah,
very, very useful. So don't
I
ignore
do.
that.
I'm guilty of that, and I will say that I've been sitting on this book for now 2, 3, 4, 5 a while. Um, it's been a while, 5 years, I think. I've been sitting there with this book going, oh, and it's like you said, it's an itch that's not getting scratched. And so it's getting worse and worse and worse. And you're right. If I don't take care of it, I'll probably do something violent. But it's 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 definitely one of those things where if I were more intentional, if I would give myself permission to just like take the time, then I would get more stuff done. So give yourself, like you said, the permission and the freedom. I think a lot of authors would probably find that a lot more liberating. I get a lot of my ideas in the shower. I know that there are shower tablets. Like you can get like things that you can
Hmm.
write in the shower. I'm thinking seriously, I'm going to need to get one of those, because I'll get marketing ideas, or a client will have given me a book and they're like asking me for an idea about something, and I'll come up with a plot idea in the middle of my shower. And I'm like, crap, I'm washing my hair. I don't know where to write this down. So maybe I'm going to have to get me one of those. But yeah, give yourself opportunities to write this stuff down, or record it, even just if you voice record it. Um, okay, so writing from the gut versus writing outline. Like is there a conflict there? I don't think there is, but what do you think, Troy? I mean, there's that, it's the plotter versus pantser idea, right?
Potentially. Okay. So for some people, there is such a thing as overplotting. In fact, I think for most people, there's such a thing as overplotting because you plotted the story so much you've left no room for inspiration. And this is why people that are discovery writers are totally like, I can never plot anything out because I would totally ruin my creativity. And that's not necessarily true. Giving yourself
Mm-mm.
guideposts and goals to aim for doesn't have to kill your creativity, but it keeps you focused on this is where I should be ending up approximately. And then you can get to know your characters and give them a nice little journey there, and you probably have to edit the heck out of that later, but that is giving your muse the absolute freedom to write whatever they want, right?
Right.
But if you do it 100% freeform, that does give you some editing issues. The truth is, even if you don't write it down subconsciously, you probably know a big, good part of where the story is going. But the
Hmm.
danger is that somewhere along the way, you'll lose that inspiration and lose that direction, and then you won't remember where you were going. And this is a large
Right.
number of unfinished first drafts by new authors, are because when you started, you knew where you were going, but something happened in the middle. Your character took the wrong turn at Albuquerque, and now you're in the middle of a cornfield going, what in the world are we doing here in this cornfield? I was headed to New York, right? And you
Hmm.
completely lost the thread and lost the plot, and you've forgotten how you had planned to get there. So even a loose outline at the beginning gives you the direction that your muse was going and lets your direction have your muse have some direction to follow, right?
Hmm.
So creativity generally needs boundaries, especially if you are an ADHD writer or someone who has the ADHD or whatever, which we talked about in like our last
Hmm.
thing.
Last
And I
video.
mean, I'm
Hmm.
talking about people that are diagnosed and all the things that we talked about in the last video. If you're just making it up that you think you might be ADHD because you can't find your keys on Thursdays, that's probably not a diagnosis. But anyway, but if you know that you have these things legitimately, you know that you're going to get distracted. If you just have shiny object syndrome, you know you're going to get distracted along the way. And
Hmm.
all that a loose outline does is give you direction to bring you back on task and back on point, right? So don't be afraid of plotting and outlining, killing your creativity, but do be conscious of people will say, how detailed of a plot should I make? And I'm like, as soon as you start feeling like it's restrictive and it's taking ideas away rather than giving them to you, then it's probably time to stop plotting. And so I know the plot dude's going to tell you don't overplot, right? Okay, yeah, actually I am.
Yeah.
Because plotting is a part of the art form.
Right.
Plotting is a
Exactly.
craft in and of itself. So you need to learn how to do it if you're going to do it.
Hmm.
I mean, and it's just a
Right.
matter of finding your own way of how detailed you want to get and how
Right.
detailed you can get. But you need something that gives you
Right.
some sort of a direction.
Because
So,
you certainly don't want to go down the way of like a complete pantser, and then, like you said, having an editor look it up and say, oh, you dropped this plot point, you've dropped this, there's this huge gaping hole here, this character arc is not matching up with the climax because you didn't do that correctly. Like those are very expensive mistakes. So
mhm. Or you
plotting
have
and outline.
120,000 words for an 80,000 word book,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah. So
like,
it
you
can
know,
get really expensive. So the best bet is to, again, use your gut and use an outline to kind of help keep you on point. I mean, it's like Troy and I, we have these conversations all the time, but I have an outline that keeps us on point. Otherwise, we could go off and we could talk for 4 hours on just one of our
mhm.
tangents. That's boring.
Well, and another thing is the more you write, the better your gut will get at
Right.
keeping that story. But when
Right.
you're brand new, you need a little more structure. The other exception is this: if you're one of those writers who can just binge write and do 10,000 word days and get a book done in 5 days or a week
That would
or
be
2 weeks
awesome.
or whatever. Okay, if you are one of those people that can do that and you're a binge writer, which there are binge writers out there that
Hmm.
can do that and can do it repeatedly, then you can probably hold that story in your head for 5 days. The problem is most of you are taking a year to write a book. And
Hmm.
by the end of that year, you had no idea, if you haven't written it down, what you started, the idea you started with and how well you've stuck to that idea.
Yeah.
So that's part of what's going on. So just understand that that's what's happening and plan for it. It's
Plan for it.
okay. It's
And it's
actually
okay.
perfectly okay, but just plan
Yeah.
for it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and then like I said earlier when I was talking to that author, I mean, she's I think she might consider herself a binge writer because she wrote this massive story in 7 months. Um, when I say massive, it's I think she's at eight 800 and something thousand words at this point. It's huge.
Oof.
Yeah, it was massive. And it was difficult for me. I mean, this is what's weird is most of the time as an editor, I can be like, cut that, cut that, cut that, cut that. This book, she had the pacing on point. So when I had to put the book down to walk away for, food or whatever, it was tough because the pacing was perfect. And so there was no put the book down points, which was amazing.
Mm, which is good.
And yeah, really good. And when we were talking about ways that we could tighten it up, I mean, of course, there's the natural like cut this out, cut this out to tighten up the narration and the dialogue, which I mean, probably we would only cut out about 15 to 20,000 words max out of that massive manuscript. We were talking about plot points that she could pull out, and there were very few. And but to be able to sit down and talk that out, she actually had all that outlined. Like she has it all outlined. So she, even though
Hmm.
she's a binge writer and she probably like this just came to her in the middle of the night, she still had all this kind of mapped out. She's got a three
Hmm.
book plan, so she kind of sees how this is going to kind of play out with all these characters. And it was just beautifully laid out. And but while we were talking a couple of times, we were like just channeling, like you said, just channeling ideas. Like, well, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And there were a couple times where we were looking at each other going, oh my gosh, that would make that much, much better. And like, oh, that would deepen that up. And we could,
Hmm.
and and you could see her brain just, and she was just down there. She was just
Hmm.
typing away. And that's the thing. You don't have to, like, she's going with her gut. She's going with her gut. She knows her characters better than I do. She knows her lore, and we've already said this, Troy, before, but I mean, it's one thing we'll reiterate probably over and over again is that nobody's going to love your book as much as you are. So she
Hmm.
knows her book. She is the god of her universe, and so she is going to be able to like understand what the motivations of her world is better than I am. But to be able to understand and know, okay, there has to be a plan. That's a mature writer, in my opinion. Sometimes writers get in their own head and they think,
Hmm.
oh, like you said, I'm just going to let it go and I'm going to go free ball in it and like see what happens. And, going without a bra sometimes, ladies, if you're going to go for a run, is not a good idea. Sometimes you need some support.
Yeah. Walmart, acceptable. Jog, not so much.
Not so
But
much.
I mean, well, and like I said, there's some writers that can hold all that in their heads and do
Mhm.
that for a short period of time, and they write really quickly, and that's great, that's awesome, that's amazing. But the reason we point to those writers as exceptions to the rule is because they're an exception.
Right,
Most people, most writers can't do that. Well, if
right,
you're not one of these savants that can do that, well, okay, then slow yourself down and plot things out a little bit. Okay, and there's
right,
all kinds of tools you can use to help yourself plot and all that kind of stuff. And we can talk about those. But I mean, the reason for this is allowing room for that inspiration is really what we're talking
right,
about in this session, is
right.
allowing room for that, allowing room for your muse, allowing room for your brain to just go off on a tangent and work. In order to do that, you need to have some boundaries for it to operate in. Because if you're writing a steamy romance, you don't want, you know, um, a pregnancy crisis, right? I mean, that just kind of stops the steam,
Right,
for at least a little bit.
right.
Um, so, I mean, you know what I'm saying? There's always something that's like, you need the boundaries of your story and your genre and what's actually happening there. If your story is happening in Seattle, somebody doesn't suddenly go to Chicago,
Yeah,
because that messes with you. And then you have to change a whole lot of things about your outline and your story and your because
So
things are very different.
I think you just hit on something that I really wanted to touch on, and that's like recognizing when your energy aligns with your purpose and your reason for writing. It aligns with your work, making sure that your energy is going to be willing to and open to that receiving of those stories and those ideas.
Hmm.
And like you said, we can sometimes close ourselves off by just having different circumstances or having, allowing other things and other parts of our life to overwhelm and stress us out or to take us away or take our brain away. One of the things that I think a lot of writers do that, or a lot of people do that want, and I'm guilty of this, so I'm pointing fingers at me too. But one of the things that we don't allow ourselves to do is we don't allow ourselves that quiet time. We're always
Hmm.
we're always filling our heads with social media, movies, TV, busy, 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 and you're not giving yourself the chance to be bored. And that's literally what it is. You have to give your brain the time and the effort, or the space to to think. And if you don't, if you continually muddy it and give it tasks or input, then you're not going to be able to receive. It's very, very true.
Hmm.
I've told a lot of authors this, that they're like, I have a writer's block, and I'm like, when's the last time you just sat and stared at the sky for 15 to 20 minutes?
Hmm.
Like when's the last time you just
Yeah.
stared at a wall and not stared at your phone? It really is important to give yourself that time to just think. And that's why me in the shower is such a big thing, because I'm doing something that doesn't
Hmm.
require any of my brain. Like I am doing something that I don't have to think about. So what is my brain going to do? It's going to go off and think about other things, and it gives my brain the space. That's why sleeping is so essential to our health, because it
Hmm.
it literally gives our brain the chance to relax. If you go with, I think what is the rule on this? But I think that they say if you go 7 days without sleep, you can die or something like that. It's some crazy thing.
You can. Sleep
Yeah.
deprivation is the best form of torture that there
Yeah.
is, the most effective form of torture that there is, because literally, if you've been without sleep long enough and I've disrupted your circadian rhythm long enough, you will
Hmm.
tell me everything that I ask you
Yeah.
about yourself
Right.
because you will lose absolute control of your brain. So that's a part of it. But I was going to just mention that that's why showers or going for a walk or
Going for a
taking a
walk.
bath or meditation is so good and so important for writers is because essentially you're just turning that conscious part of your brain off
Hmm.
and allowing your subconscious to flow. The other thing is you need outlets other than writing. You
Hmm.
know, if you have
Yeah.
a lake and you have a river of information and stuff coming into it, and you only have one tiny outlet, well, your
It
river,
might get
your lake is
bland.
going to get
It might get
stagnant.
damned. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it gets stagnant. It doesn't work very well. So you really need to have the outlets for that. So if you're not writing and you're not creative and you have a writer's block, find another way, another artistic outlet. Draw something, even if you're not good at it.
Yeah.
Make some music, even if you're not that great at it. Take guitar
Yeah.
lessons, something like that, that you've got a creative outlet that allows your brain to just empty some of that creativity somewhere and make room for new stuff and fresh
Right.
stuff. So it's a matter of it's a very being creative is a very deliberate exercise. And
Right.
sometimes when we're, especially when we're first starting out or we're younger, we do that naturally and we don't realize what we're doing, but we lose it as we go, oh, well, now I do this for a living, so I have to do it all the time, and I have to make money, and I have to do this, and I have to do that. And you lose that focus of the real thing, the real juice, the real thing that keeps you going is that creativity, and you've got to allow room for that. Like you were talking about taking your weekends, setting hours for days off, stuff like that. Like I take my days off during the week usually because that's when Holly has her days off. So I take them off during the week, but I don't even tell anybody necessarily I'm taking my day off except for very few people. I just do it and I go and do other things. So like I've had this, I was helping a neighbor move over the last few days. and I had two ideas for stories that I'm like, because this one, like, I need to write it. It's part of this series that I'm working on, and I need to write it. But I'm like, the idea for it and the character for it came to me when I'm doing something else entirely. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, fantastic. So I got a chance that evening to go, okay, and I wrote down the basics of that and then left it, right? Like now I can go and I know tomorrow morning I'll wake up and I'll have time and I'll go and write the first part of that story because I know what it is. I know who the character is because that came to me when I was off doing something else entirely,
That's
right?
awesome.
So really
Yeah.
important to give yourself that time. I
Yeah.
did that million word year in 2020. I can tell you by the end of the year, creativity was much harder than at the start of the year
Yeah.
because I was
Yeah.
forcing myself to be creative so much all the time and write so many thousands of words that by the end of it, my creativity hadn't had time to refill. I hadn't had that time to sit and let it refill. And so I was running on empty. So it's really important, even if you have these big, lofty goals, to give yourself some time, slow down, let your brain give you the things that it needs and give it things that it needs for you to be creative, you know.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah.
great. That's great advice. Yeah. So I guess, there's practices, I guess, to get into your intuitive, the free writing you mentioned. You also mentioned
Hmm.
journaling. You can just like you said, do other things like listen to music or play music or give yourself those other creative outlets. Just breathe, people. Just breathe. So let's talk a little bit about when characters speak to you. Or they demand your own path. Sometimes that happens, right? Like I think I heard an
Mm.
interview once where J.K. Rowling said something to the effect of like she was going one way with the story and it just the characters were going a different way. So
Hmm.
I think that was her. Um, have you ever had an experience like that where you've like, okay, guys, we're
Oh
going this
yeah.
direction, and your characters are like, nope.
More than once, the ending of my first, really successful novel, I had it planned out from the beginning, and that's not how it ended. Because the character at the end said, I ain't doing that. And I was like, all right, what are you doing then? Right? And took things a little bit of a different direction, right? Now, it
Hmm.
wasn't a vastly different direction. It's not like I was headed for, California and I ended up in Nebraska. It wasn't like that drastic of a change, but it was a small change where I was like, I think this is what this character would do. And down to the end of the book, it's like, no, that's not what this character is going to do. And it was because the character basically said, no way, dude. I'm not doing that. And that wasn't necessarily like a literal voice speaking to me, but like then by that point, you know your characters, you
Hmm.
know what they're thinking, you know what they want to do, and you can see, okay, this is not a choice that this character would make
Right.
necessarily, right? This is not the choice that the direction that this character would go, as much as I would like them to do that, because it would makes my ending really neat. And okay, well now I have to figure out a different neat way to make the ending because they aren't going to do that. It's happened to me more than once in more than one book. And so even some of the stuff that I've written quickly, I have the idea of what this character is going to do by the end, and that's not what happens. I have an idea of who the hero is going to be, and that's not the hero of your story because your hero says, I'm not the hero. That's the hero, that guy over there. You need to go pay attention to him. Um, and so your muse, that natural ability that you have, if you're willing to listen, will direct your stories. Now, part of what happens a lot of times with books is writers won't listen, and
Hmm.
the book turns out to be really bad, or
Mm.
just it feels a little off, like it's
Or it feels
not as good
forced.
as it could have been,
Hmm.
and it feels forced. And you're like, yeah, like anyway, I'll
Yeah.
refrain from the saying, but anyway, um, but anyway, but if you're forcing it as a writer, first of all, it's not going to feel genuine to you. And
Hmm.
you maybe, your friends and people are like, come on, just finish that book. And you're like, okay. And you're just trying to force the characters in this neat little ending you have figured out because this is the way you want things to go. And truthfully, that's just not always the right answer.
Right. Right.
Like it's just not always the right answer. So you need to give yourself that freedom to listen to your characters and say, hey, these guys got a different idea. Maybe I should roll with that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's plain and simple. That is the way that it goes.
So there are
So,
some blurred
um,
lines between invention and reception then, because then
mhm,
maybe, excuse me, maybe sometimes then you might be channeling something like, and like you said, you even said that sometimes it feels like you're not the one writing. Like
mhm.
maybe there is some kind of like I said, other presence in, and it could be, I don't know, like there, like you said, that just you don't know because it could be,
Yeah,
who knows?
because the question is the universe, so this is always kind of the internal question, is the universe telling you something, and this character is actually someone outside, you've all everybody's read the stories where the writer is writing things. My own typewriter repair shop, right? Go grab it. The writer is writing a story and then realizes that this is real. Like
Hmm.
these characters are real. This is really happening somewhere. So when you and we've all read those stories, but and kind of science fictiony type stuff like that too, or
Hmm.
paranormal or whatever. But sometimes as a writer, that's what it feels like, is somebody, you're writing someone's story and they're dictating it to you, and sometimes you get it wrong and they're like, nope, you got it wrong.
Right, you
Now,
got it wrong.
and people will say, well, maybe that's your subconscious making a correction to the story because you know the story structure and you know the things and you know the character arcs and the things like that you've studied, and so maybe that's what's happening. And maybe you're right. Maybe you are,
Hmm.
but it doesn't feel like that. There are
Mm-mm.
times for a writer when it feels like this is something outside of you. This is a character that's telling you their story, and you need to listen to them. And if you don't listen to them, they're going to make corrections with you, right? Now, how much of that is can I prove,
Can't
right?
prove
Well, I
any of
can't
it.
prove it, but we can talk about writers. And this is the other thing about it, is this, I'm not talking about religious writers
No,
because I am not a religious guy.
right. I
Stephen
am,
King is
but
not a particularly
right.
religious person, right? But he does believe in spirituality and in
Hmm.
supernatural things. He writes about it all the time.
All the time.
Hey,
Hmm.
so do I. I write about it all the time. And a part of that, I think, is because experiencing creativity, true creativity, sometimes just leads you to understand that there is something out there that's bigger than us. Now,
Hmm.
I have beliefs about what that is and what name we should call it and what name we shouldn't call it, and all those different things, right? We could get into all of that, but relating it to writing is just very simply that there is a vast universe.
Hmm.
And things are coming to you from that universe, and how they are coming to you and how that creativity is born is certainly open to debate. And corner me at a bar and we'll talk all night long about it, right? But
But we don't have
the
to.
reality of
We
the
don't have,
situation is, yeah, we don't have to.
we don't have to.
Excuse me. But the situation is that there are just times when you feel like you're channeling the story or channeling the characters. The characters have gone a different direction, but you're telling their story. This is not your
Hmm.
story that you're forcing them to fit into your plot. I've had writers, like in critique groups I've been in, I say, why does this happen right here? Because it doesn't feel natural in the book. He says, well, I needed this to happen. I'm like, it doesn't seem like this character would do that. That doesn't make sense. And we've all had those moments of reading books when we're like, that, why would that character do that? That doesn't make sense. Which is why understanding their motivation and the things we've talked about, that understanding their goals, motivation, and conflict, why that's important, especially in the revision process. But as a writer, you know when it's going wrong, but you're like, but this needs to happen right here. If you're telling yourself that, this needs to happen right here. So who of my characters is the one that's going to do this? You're probably off a little bit. Like
Right.
something is wrong with either your plot or the way you've developed your character because you haven't been true to who they really are.
Right.
Like this idea I had this weekend, not only did the idea, because the idea, like the premise, the type of the things that are going to happen in the story, I've had that for a while, but I
Hmm.
didn't have a character. So largely what came to me this weekend was the character. Who is this story going to be about? I know what it's going to be about. Who is it going to be about? And why are they going to act this way? Why are they going to do this thing? And now I have the structure and the story in mind, and I know about how long that story will be. And some
Yeah.
of that is because of that gut we're talking about, but part of it is because now I know who that character is. Now, where did that character come from? I don't know. I didn't see somebody at a gas station go, "You, sorry, buddy, you're in a book and you ain't gonna like it." I didn't, that's not what happened, right?
Good.
So where
So
did that
yeah,
character come from? I
so
don't know.
sometimes then as authors and as creatives in general, and all of us as humans, all humans have some form of creativity in them. So whatever that is, and you can use it and channel it in any way you want, or however it feels right to you. But sometimes that stuff is, quote, given to you. And like
Hmm.
maybe you're given a line in a dream, or maybe, like you said, sometimes you find a solution in just a conversation. Um, you know, you can go deep into the occult about this, or you can, stick with your religiousness about it. There's you whatever you want to attribute that to. But like Troy and I said, I mean, he's not religious and I am, and we can have these conversations and still come to a meeting of the minds, because we both understand that there is a way that sometimes you're going to get those messages, and that when you get them, if you accept that, if you're willing to accept that you just were, if you don't feel like you have to track down the reason you got it, but you're just happy to receive it, then you're going to probably be more open to more of them. And so trust the process. Understand that sometimes when you're channeling these ideas, that it's okay to just not have the answer and just go with it.
Hmm.
So you don't have to go full conspiracy on this
Yeah.
thing. You're not part of what is it, the brainwashing experiments the government did. You don't have to
Yeah.
think you
We're not
weren't
we're
part
not
of any
gonna
of that.
we're not gonna create a compound, run up a funny
No,
flag, shoot
no,
guns out front every now and then. When the ATF shows up and says we come in, no, no,
nah.
you can't. Sorry. We're having
There's none of
Kool-Aid at
that.
7 though. Join
So
us if
yeah,
you want.
Troy doesn't want us to worship him as God. It's fine. it's
No, no,
just
no,
it's
no.
just woo woo.
Yeah,
Huh.
I mean, and a part of this, you don't have to be particularly spiritual. You don't have to be particularly
No.
religious. Obviously, you don't have to be any of that. It's just more of an acknowledgement that creativity is an ethereal thing that comes from somewhere. We don't
Hmm.
fully understand it, but the beauty of it is that we don't have to fully understand it. The older you get and the more experience you have, the greater it is to just say there's some things I absolutely do not understand in this world, and I don't have to understand everything and put a name to it to accept that it exists, and that there are times when it's really, really good for me,
Okay.
you know?
Yeah. I mean,
So,
and that's
yeah.
true. Like, just honor the mystical without getting weird about it. But also, just understand also that even though there might be this mystical quality to writing, it isn't all mystical. There is some talent or some skills that you have to employ in order for this to be
Hmm.
communicated correctly. So, as a communications major, I'm going to point this out. Every time you're communicating, it is not just me talking. That is not communication. Communication is actually a two-way process. Communication is not just me communicating and speaking, but it's also you understanding and receiving the message. And unless both of us are doing that, unless there's an exchange of ideas, then communication is not happening. So one of the things that kind of gets my goat right now in today's world and our chaos and the political climates and everything is that no two people are sitting down and communicating. It's just one party yelling at another party and nobody's listening. Like there's a yell
Hmm.
fest happening, and nobody's actually exchanging ideas or having a meeting of understanding or a meeting of minds. And that's that. When you're writing a book, you have to understand that there is a communication. You may not understand how that reader is going to receive the message. But that is why you have editors. That's why you have beta readers. That's why you have critique partners, because they can actually give you that reader experience and help you understand if you are delivering the message correctly and that it's going to be received the way you want. Now, understand and be open to and accepting of the fact that every reader is going to have their own perspectives and ideas and journeys when they come to your book, and they experience that, because everybody has a lens that they're going to use when they read your story. But you want to, if you have a specific agenda or a specific story that you're trying to project or you're trying to share, you want to make sure that that's going to be delivered and created in a way that people are going to understand it the way you intend them to. So there
Right.
is a skill level to that.
Yeah, I mean, so let's add to the woo-woo part of this just a tiny little bit of
Hmm.
salt we're going to call craft. Okay,
Hmm.
because craft, and this is a saying I've often said, I don't know if I've actually said it on our podcast before, but I've said it before in classes and stuff. Craft equals clarity.
Hmm.
Really, the craft of writing is about taking your message that you know that you have, whatever that is, and that message doesn't have to be some profound theme type of thing, but like in a mystery, it can be simply the message of the puzzle, right?
Right.
And
Hmm.
delivering it in a way that the reader can clearly understand and see all the different clues and all the different pieces and how they come together. Okay. Craft equals clarity. Editing equals clarity. I often tell my editing clients, what you've done is you created a beautiful fire, and my job as an editor is to clear away the smoke so that people can see it.
Right.
So when you come into an editing situation and you're not open to what your editor is saying to you, the problem that you're doing is you're leaving behind a lot of smoke. And
Hmm.
readers are going to come into your book going, I can't see what's going on here, and they're going to leave, right? If you want your message to resonate with reader, because imagination begins in the mind of the author, it finishes in the mind of the reader. What editors help you do, what beta readers and other people that read your stuff before it goes to publication help you do is understand whether you are communicating clearly enough that the reader can finish what you've started in your imagination. So craft
Hmm.
is about clarity, is about clarifying that message. So when I'm talking to you about plotting, what I'm talking about is finding a way to present that message and that information in your book to readers in a way that they can understand. Not
Hmm.
that because, often I would have writers tell me, well, what I meant by that thing that you circled in the editing thing was this. And they go on to
Hmm.
explain it to me. And I go, that's wonderful. Are you going to go to every Amazon customer that buys your book and knock on their door and go, I know this passage in chapter 3 is a little bit confusing, but what I really meant was, and you're going to explain it to them. Well, no, you can't do that, right? Because it
Right.
doesn't work that way. So what I'm trying to do is get you to understand how to get that message to them in a way that's clear and that they can understand. So by saying the woo-woo part, what I'm saying is I'm not saying go forth and write whatever your muse tells you and just throw it out there in the universe and publish it on KTP as soon as you're done. Your muse is going to give you a very rough first draft of a story and an idea with kind of a cool message, and more than likely, unless there's systems that you can do it, that you can edit as you go along, stuff like that. But more than likely, your first draft is not going to be worthy of being seen by most people.
Right.
Like there are
Right.
exceptions to the rule, but that's for the most part, that is just not true.
That's
Okay.
true.
So
Yeah.
just, you know,
Yeah. Yeah. So I got some questions for you. We can wrap it up with these questions. Are you ready? What's the most
I'm
mystical
ready.
writing experience you've ever had?
Oh, so okay. So I was writing this story. I don't even remember which story I was writing. I don't remember, but I was on a museum contract. I was in Gettysburg, staying with my cousin.
Mm.
Well, I wasn't. I was in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, but I was working at Gettysburg, staying with my cousin. I'd come home. I had this idea for this story, so I sat down and I was writing this story, right? And I got in that flow state. I got in that zone, and I had my headphones on, but like they weren't really, like super loud or anything. The music wasn't super loud or anything because I don't even remember what music was in them. I have no idea. My cousin came home from work. We had two separate rooms. My room was the first one, hers was the second one. So, and we were roommates in this apartment. She walks by my door. looks in on me. I'm, of course, furiously typing away. I I don't know, and the only reason I know any of this is because she told me later. So she
Okay.
comes in, she's making her usual noise, dropping her purse, chink, keys, whatever, walking on the hall, not being quiet, anything, walks past me, goes into her room, bangs around, changes her clothes, thinking any minute now, Troy will say, "Hey, welcome home." She takes a shower, gets dressed or whatever, comes out and like looks in again. I'm still typing away. She goes, "Huh, that's kind of interesting. I wonder what's happening there." She goes in the kitchen, makes dinner, starts making dinner. The thing that finally brought me out of the writing trance was the smell of food cooking about an hour and a half after she had gotten home. And I literally, the only reason I know all of this happened is because she told me later. Like, I just remember being writing and kind of slowing down and going, "Man, I wonder who's cooking. What time is it?" And then like looking around, go, "Oh crap!" Taking my headphones off. "Oh man, I'm so sorry." But yeah,
That's
being in the
funny.
zone. So there's times when I've been in the zone so much that nothing brings me out of that zone.
Hmm.
So but that's one of the extreme ones. There was another one time with my son, kind of same thing. He was like, his mom was at work. He's waiting for me to feed him. And he's been told, don't disturb dad when he's in the office with his headphones on. And eventually this little head peeks around the corner. And I'm like, huh, take my headphones on. "What's up, buddy?" "Dad, it's 7 o'clock. Are we going to eat supper?" "Oh shoot, yeah, buddy. Let me just order you something. Let me get you something. I'm sorry, man." But yeah, it's
Yeah.
just so I've had a number of experiences like that, but those are probably the most like completely absorbed mystical experiences where there's no explanation, and I don't necessarily remember even which books I was writing at that time. I just remember
Hmm.
being so into the story and the characters that literally nothing would bring me out of it. Like
That's
nothing.
cool. That's funny. Do you believe do you then well, I mean you kind of answered this question, but do you believe then that you've been a vessel for certain stories? That you've
Oh
been,
yeah, for sure. For
yeah?
sure. There are a
Do you
couple of
have one
them that
in
I
mind?
can. Oh yeah, well, typewriter repair shop was one. So the
Uh-huh.
story behind that was I wrote the story straight for Stray Ally, which is it's one of my better selling books. You can find it, whatever. Go look at it. But I wrote it for Nano and I finished NaNoWriMo in 3 weeks.
Okay.
62,000 words, whatever. In like 3 weeks. I was going to the write-in at the end of Nano and so when I went to Garibaldi, Oregon that particular summer for a writer event and was selling books on the coast there, and there was a house up on the hill, and the girls that I was with kept teasing me that I should buy that house, that was my house. And I'm like, that is not I'm not going to buy a house here. I don't like it well enough to buy a house here. And I go, you guys just want me to buy that house so you can come visit and have that house, right? And be able to use that house. And they're like, well, yeah, kind of. I'm like, no, I'm not buying that house. But because they'd aroused this curiosity about it, I went up and drove by that house. And the house was on the big side of a hill, and there was a driveway that went down. Then the house, there were two different houses right next to each other, and this spark of an idea like started in the back of my head, and I thought, man, I wonder what would happen with that house. I wonder what could happen with those two houses. And it was just like this little itch of an idea back there. Well, I got down to the end of November. That happened in July. I got down to the end of November, and I'm like. I'm going to write in for Nano, but I'm done with Nano. I should probably write something. And I started writing that story. And I, some of the writing sessions for that story I do not remember. And
Mm.
I don't know how that particular idea came to me, but I wrote that novella in 2 weeks,
Wow. Okay.
start to finish. And that was the one that the reviewer quoted, and I can't remember writing that quote in that
Wow.
story. But it's also just one of my most popular stories. It's about a writer, that type of thing. But it was really, I think it was partly because I just had that idea in the back of my head for like, well, what if a writer lived there? Well, what happened in that house? And then it was a combination of that and having finished Nano as quickly as I did, and realizing that, you know, there's this kind of ethereal thing that's happening with writing. And I
Hmm.
wrote that story, and like there were two women in that story. I don't know if those two women kind of sort of represented the two writers that I'd gone to that event in Garibaldi with. I don't know. But there was a boy in there, and that boy was a super interesting character. And I'm like, I don't know where all those people came from. And I don't know
Mm.
where, like even the main character, I don't know where that guy came from. But it was just this idea that was in the back of my head, and suddenly I wrote it, and the whole thing felt like it wasn't me that was writing that story at all.
Wow.
So anyway,
Wow.
it was really cool. It was I still love that story all the time. Anyway,
Do
so
you
yeah.
have any favorite like woo-woo writing tools that you like? Do you do anything that's kind of a little that people would could maybe consider woo-woo when it comes to your writing?
Actually, it's more practical with me. So, and this is a funny story. So for a while now, and for the last couple of years, so I had the whole plotter thing happen. If you listen to this, you've heard that story before. If you haven't heard that story before, go back and watch previous episodes or watch other videos of mine, whatever. I'm not going to rehash that, but right. But I was for a while, I was very distracted from my own work, right? And as a result of that, like I tried a number of different things, like a number of writing software. But before that, the thing that I did was, so I edit a lot. So I edit in Word, right?
Hmm.
Microsoft Word is the standard. Like, I'm not a huge fan of Google Docs. I will write in them if I have to, if I'm on the go or something. Not a huge fan. I tried some other writing software. I'm not going to name it here because I don't want to diss on any writing software. But
Hmm.
before that, what I always used was I used Scrivener. And the
Hmm.
reason I used Scrivener is I opened Scrivener, my brain went, okay, we're fiction writing because that's the only thing I did in Scrivener. I don't
Hmm.
edit in Scrivener. I don't write nonfiction in Scrivener. I don't write anything else in Scrivener except for fiction, right?
Right.
So I'd open it, my brain says, we're writing fiction, and it would be very easy for me to get in that flow state. Well, I went away from that and tried a bunch of other different writing software. You know what I'm
Hmm.
writing my current book and my current story in?
Scrivener.
Scrivener. You know why? As soon as I open it, my brain goes, oh, we're writing fiction. Let's do it. So it's not necessarily what people would consider weird, but it's a tool that I've used that tricks my brain into fiction writing. And because I was having some struggles with, you know, organizing my stuff and getting back into writing the routine that I wanted and stuff like that after the plotter thing, I went back to Scrivener, and I'm perfectly happy there. I'm like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
there's some things I don't like about the interface that I wish they would update, but my brain apparently likes it well enough that when I open it up, it allows me to write. Eh,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
That's
So,
interesting. I have that same kind of relationship. I have a love-hate relationship with Word. As an editor, I mean, we use Word, and of course that's kind of shifting now. I mean, I know a lot of editors are shifting to
mhm.
different softwares, but or different, writing softwares that they'll use to edit, but I still am an old school, I'll use Word. However, because of my writing, um, the way I wrote when I was in school, and then when I wrote before school, and how I ran business, when I was running businesses and had to write up reports and stuff, I was always done in Word. So it's the same thing. I open Word up, and if I've got a blank page in Word, I know the structure. I know what it's supposed to look like. There I go. I'm going to put words in there, and it's just my
Mhm.
my essay brain turns on, and I'm like, there it goes. um
Well,
you
yeah,
know so it's just the way it works. But yeah, you're right. It's just it's kind of
yeah,
whatever works for you. If it's lighting a candle, like I said, or
yeah.
turning on some mood music,
Oh,
whatever
music.
it takes. Hmm.
Yeah. Music is a big one for me too, and some people say they don't listen to music with words. I deliberately listen to music with words because the
That
words
Yeah,
often inspire me.
that's
And so
crazy
I
to me
know
because,
that's
yeah, I
different,
can't do that.
but
Yeah, that's
eventually
different
I
for
don't
you.
consciously hear the words,
Uh-huh.
but they're there. And so usually what it is it's a playlist of something that I've created that I know that those lyrics and those words are deep, and but I know the songs and stuff well enough that I can also zone into them.
See,
So
and
I don't want to
my
listen
whole
to new music. I can't
Yeah.
listen to new music and write because I'm analyzing that music. Ooh, what was that lyric? Ooh, that was really clever. Ooh, that was cool.
Yeah.
Can't do that. But if it's something that I'm very familiar with, that I know is inspirational to me, especially of a certain genre, like if I'm writing action stuff, man, if I got a Metallica playlist going on, I might be drumming in between paragraphs, but I'm in the zone, man. So yeah.
Yeah, see, and I'm opposite. I music wakes me up. And so I can't even listen to music if I'm like if I'm having a night of amnesia or not amnesia.
Insomnia.
Thank you. My brain, it's late, guys. It's late at
You
night.
you just said
Um,
amnesia when you forgot the word for insomnia. I just want to point that out.
that's right. That is right.
That's a clip,
Um,
Sydney.
that's
That's a clip right there. Do it.
so
Make it
funny.
happen.
Make
All
it
right.
so.
Anyway.
But yeah, no, no, I was literally just like thinking about how like when I have insomnia or I can't sleep, I I actually have to put on a true crime podcast, usually with Keith Morrison, because it's got a bedtime voice. But like he'll put me to sleep within 5 minutes. But if it is a music set, I get all fired up. I'm like, oh wow, that was a good beat. That reminds me of that one song. Oh, I'm gonna go down. And there have been times where my husband will roll over and he'll be like, it is 4 in the morning. What are you doing? And I'm like, ooh, I'm just going through my playlist, like I'm just adding songs. Woo, woo.
Oh yeah.
It's not good. But
Yeah,
so
not good for the
I can't
sleeping.
yeah, so I can't write with music with lyrics. You're right. Like a lot of people they give that advice. I I like lo-fi when I'm writing because lo-fi is just that I don't know, it's like that guttural music that kind of gets into your soul a little bit. But it's just they I don't know, they say something it does to your brain, but it works for me. But like do
Hmm.
you do you. Um, I guess we'll just wrap up with this. Writers are alchemists, right? Like we're creating
Hmm.
something from something. And we don't know what that something might be, but you're creating something and you're making something take shape from something that maybe is shapeless. And that is it takes talent and it takes
Hmm.
patience. You can't just anytime you're molding glass or creating a glass, sculpture, if you've ever seen glass blowers at work, it's hours and hours and like loads and loads of work. It's not something that happens just really fast and easy. There's just a lot of meticulous careful work that goes into that, and you're doing the same thing with your writing. But like Troy said, my always advice is to get that first draft out and don't worry about whether or not that noun verb or adjective is the exact noun verb or adjective that you want to use in that store in that sentence. Just get it out of your brain, and then you can nitpick and prettify it later. But you've got to let the flow happen, get into the flow state. And it's really, really difficult to be in a flow state when you're constantly analyzing every single word that you put
Hmm.
on the paper. So don't do that. My advice is just allow your brain to just get that free write out, and then we can get picky. Um, do you have
Hmm.
any other? That's going to be my final bit of advice. Do you have any
Well,
final bit of advice there?
my final bit of advice is this, because you said it really well. You're creating something from something. We're
Mhm.
alchemists, but in some ways, we are gods of our own little world,
Yeah.
except
Hmm.
that we cannot create something from nothing.
Right.
You need to have that fuel. And that fuel, wherever you believe it comes from, your muse, the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, you need that fuel and that material. So don't
Hmm.
shut yourself off from that, because you are creating something from something. And it does take craft and skill, but primarily it takes being open to your creativity.
Yeah. So don't shut yourself off from the world. Like Troy said, you go out and be part of the world that you're in. You can't be a hermit and write beautiful stories. You actually have to kind of experience what life has to offer. So give yourself a chance to experience life and then share your perspective of it. So that's the final thought on that. What's your we're gonna have to talk about what we're gonna talk about next week. But these last couple of episodes have been pretty fun. I hope you guys found this week interesting. If you haven't already, you should like, follow, and get notified, or hit us up in the comments. Vince, hi. We're gonna do a shout out to Vince. Is it Vincent?
Yeah. Yeah,
We're gonna
yeah.
do we're gonna do a
Vince.
shout out to Vincent. He is so good at like commenting every week. Thank you for being our super fan. I'm gonna do a shout out to him. Because he's just such a snarky little fan. I love it so much. But if you want, get into the comments and like give us some suggestions on what you guys want to hear from us. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll see you next week. Go ahead, go and make your mark. See you
All
guys.
right. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next week.